The morning mist clung to the quiet fields of Cedar Glen like a secret, whispering through the branches of bare oaks and brushing the edges of Daniel McCrae's porch steps. He stood there, weathered hands in his pockets, eyes lingering on the envelope resting like a verdict on his kitchen table. At 59, Dan had run the family farm nearly all his life. 3 generations had worked this land since it was purchased in the summer of 1948, but the last few years had brought nothing but hardship. 2 seasons of blistering drought, then this year's ruthless windstorms that tore through the valley just days before harvest. With most of his crops destroyed and only a sliver left salvageable, he was staring down debts higher than he could count. The bank's letter was firm. Payment due in just over 2 weeks. He had about 4,000 rubles left to his name, barely enough to fix a tractor, let alone stop the foreclosure. "Dad, I made sandwiches," came his daughter's voice from the kitchen. Isabel had moved back in after finishing her nursing degree, trying to support the farm while applying to clinics and hospitals in the area. She was 26, practical and kind, and stubbornly hopeful in ways that sometimes made Dan ache. "Thanks, Izzy. Did you hear anything back from Fairview General?" She shook her head, setting the plate down. "Still under hiring freeze, but I've got an interview at the VA clinic in Pinesboro next Tuesday." Dan paused, her words setting off a memory. Just yesterday, he'd driven past a rundown building on the far side of Pinesboro. The sign had read, Veterans Outreach Center. A few men lingered outside, coats too thin for the cold, faces weathered like abandoned roads. He remembered one of them. Peter Halverson, a name he hadn't heard since high school, back before Pete had enlisted and gone off to Southeast Asia. "You're quiet," Izzy said, watching him with a frown. "What are you thinking?" Dan scratched at his stubbled chin. "I've been thinking about what to do with those 30-some acres of root crops that made it through the storm. They're not pretty enough for the grocery chains, not worth much on the open market. But it's still food. I was wondering, what if we just gave it away?" She blinked. "Gave it?" "To the veterans," he said slowly. "I mean, we can't afford the labor to harvest it all and it'll rot before long. But if we let the local outreach center have it, carrots, beets, cabbages, maybe they could use it." "I don't know. Maybe it's a dumb idea." "It's not," she said. "Let's do it." That morning, Dan picked up the phone and called the outreach center. He was patched through to a woman named Elise Morvan, who sounded startled by his offer. "You're saying fresh vegetables? For free?" "As much as you can use." Her voice softened. "Mr. McCrae, that would be, well, extraordinary. Our pantry's been running mostly on canned donations. We had another budget cut last month. I'll send someone over this afternoon." That very day, Dan and Isabel loaded up the old farm truck and filled it with whatever they could harvest. Imperfect but healthy food. Sturdy vegetables that had weathered the storm just like he had. They arrived at the outreach center by late afternoon. The place looked smaller up close, weary around the edges. Elise met them at the door. Tall, sharp-eyed, hair streaked with gray and clipped tight. "I still can't believe this," she said, organizing a few volunteers to help unload. Among them was someone Dan hadn't seen in decades. Peter Halverson. Older now, face thinner, posture curved by time and trouble. "McCrae? Danny McCrae from Linton High?" Dan gave a small laugh and extended his hand. "That's me. Your family had that big spread out by the ridge, right?" "We still do, though the bank's circling. Might not be ours for much longer." Peter just nodded. "Still yours for now." As they unloaded the vegetables, more veterans trickled in. Elise explained they served nearly 200 vets in the county, many facing unstable housing, inadequate benefits, and the emotional weight of wars nobody remembered. Canned food, expired goods, that's our norm, she said. Fresh produce, this is rare. Before Dan and Isabel left, he turned back and made one more offer. If anyone wants to help harvest, send them our way. I can't pay, but whatever we bring in, they can take some home. The next morning, Dan couldn't believe what he saw. 2 vans pulled into the yard packed with people. 15 veterans, all shapes and sizes from different wars and different places, but united in a kind of quiet determination. Peter had organized them. Some wore jackets that hinted at their service, desert patches, worn unit logos, caps from a war that hadn't ended in their heads. One man caught Dan's eye. He arrived alone, in a dusty pickup. Tall, lean, with silver in his hair, and something hard in his eyes. Unlike the others, he wore plain work clothes, no insignia, just a presence. "Who's that?" Dan asked. "That's the colonel," Peter said quietly. "Nobody knows much. He doesn't talk about the past, but when he shows up, things get done." They worked through the morning, hauling cabbages, pulling roots, moving with the practiced precision of people used to orders and sweat. At lunchtime, the tall man approached Dan. "You're McCrae," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "Your timing's providential. The center was down to scraps." Dan shrugged. It didn't sit right, letting food rot when folks needed it. "Generosity isn't about extra," the man said. "It's about what you decide matters." They ate quietly under the shade of a maple tree, and Dan noticed how the man kept glancing toward the north edge of the farm. A stretch of rocky land that had always seemed useless, a purchase his father had made back in the 60s and never developed. Isabel noticed it too. "He asked me when Grandpa bought that section," she said. "Seemed unusually interested." "Probably just making conversation," Dan replied, but a strange feeling had crept into his gut. That night, they sat on the porch, exhausted but at peace. The financial clock was still ticking, but something had shifted. The farm might still fall, but today they'd done something that mattered. Helped people. Shared. Lived. What Dan didn't know, couldn't have known, was that his act of giving had set off something far larger. That the man who'd moved so quietly among the veterans, whose eyes had measured more than crops, was no ordinary volunteer, and that the dusty stretch of rocky land he'd inherited held more than dirt and thistle. Before dawn the next day, Dan awoke to a sound that made no sense, the heavy, rhythmic thud of helicopter rotors. By the time he reached the window, a massive olive-green military chopper was descending into the north field. Black SUVs with government plates rumbled down his driveway. Soldiers stepped out, forming a perimeter. Isabel stood in the hallway, her voice tight with disbelief. "Dad, there are soldiers outside, and a helicopter just landed in the north field." Dan pulled on his boots. "Stay inside," he said, his own pulse hammering. "Let's see what the hell is going on." Dan stepped out onto the porch, blinking into the early haze as the heavy thump of the helicopter blades slowed and settled. The north field, barely visible through the morning mist, now bore the unmistakable footprint of something far beyond his world. Government SUVs, uniformed personnel fanning out with precise urgency, soldiers moving like chess pieces on familiar ground. He counted 4 dark vehicles parked near the edge of his yard, their windows blacked out, antennae bristling. Others were setting up what looked like mobile communication gear near the barn, carrying metallic cases and running cable like they knew the land better than he did. The porch steps creaked under his weight, a sound he'd heard all his life, though this morning it seemed louder. From one of the SUVs stepped a tall woman in uniform. Crisp, fatigues, sharp gaze, clipboard in hand. A second figure followed, dressed in a suit with a badge visible just long enough to make a statement. The woman stepped forward, her expression neutral but not unfriendly. "Mr. McCrae," she asked. "I'm Captain Rachel Dunn, aide to General Marcus Albright. The General has requested a few moments of your time. This concerns a matter of national interest." "On my farm?" Dan said, still half convinced he was dreaming. "If we may come inside," the suited man added smoothly, flashing credentials marked with Department of Defense insignia. Dan didn't study them too closely. There was no point. Whatever was happening, it had already swept him along. Inside, Isabel had already laid out coffee. Her eyes flicked from the officers to her father, silent but alert. Captain Dunn murmured something into a shoulder mic, and minutes later, the lead SUV pulled up to the house. From it emerged the tall, quiet man from yesterday, the one the others had called Colonel. Only now he wore full-dress blues, his chest heavy with medals, 4 stars gleaming on his shoulders. No longer anonymous. "Mr. McCrae," the general greeted him with the same steady voice he'd used while hauling cabbages the day before. "Thank you for your hospitality yesterday. I apologize for the abrupt arrival this morning, but after certain confirmations last night, we couldn't delay. Time is sensitive." Dan shook the man's hand, still struggling to place this all in the same world as the harvest, the debt, the cracked well pump he was supposed to fix this week. "You weren't just a volunteer," Dan said finally. The general offered the ghost of a smile. "I was, though with added purpose." The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, more fragile, as General Albright unrolled maps and satellite images across the table, the same spot where Dan had read his foreclosure letter. He pointed to a section of land just past the creek, the north patch his father had bought for next to nothing in the late 60s. "Your family acquired this parcel in 1969, the general said. "From the Olander estate, correct?" Dan nodded. "My dad bought it cheap, mostly rock, never did much with it." "And he bought the main homestead after the war?" "Right after, in 48. Built the place with his own hands." The general nodded, tapping the map again. "What your father didn't know, what no civilian could have known, is that beneath this section lies a sealed Cold War facility. In the early 60s, the Department of Defense established a network of deep earth communication bunkers throughout the country. Most were removed or repurposed by the 80s, but this one was different." Dan and Isabel exchanged glances, the same unspoken question hanging between them. "There's a bunker?" she asked. 20 feet below ground," Captain Dunn confirmed. "Still sealed, still operational, from what our scans show. Power systems designed for decades-long autonomy." Dan couldn't even begin to process it. "And you found this because I gave away some vegetables?" The general's expression didn't waver. "In a way, yes. I was scheduled to visit the region anyway, an inspection of veteran outreach programs. When I heard about your donation, I decided to observe in person, and once I realized which property I was standing on, well, let's just say I recognized the coordinates." Dr. Ellison, the suited man from Defense Intelligence, stepped forward. "We've been trying to locate this specific site for several years. Records were lost. The trail went cold. When the general saw your property, he flagged it immediately." The room went quiet for a long moment. Outside, soldiers were setting up scanning equipment near the tree line. "We're asking for access," the general said gently. "Technically, we could invoke national protocols, but I prefer cooperation. After yesterday, I believe you've earned the truth." Dan let the words settle. His hands, still calloused from farm work, trembled slightly. "So, there's a facility under my land, from the Cold War, and it's still functional." The general nodded. "And it may contain intelligence we urgently need." Dan looked to Isabel. She gave a slow nod. "You'd better show us." By midday, military engineers had located the concealed hatch. It was masterfully disguised, its edges buried under decades of soil and root. From above, it looked like nothing more than a natural boulder outcrop. "It's genius," Dr. Ellison said, crouching beside the now exposed entrance. "Even with coordinates, we'd never have found it without ground-penetrating scans." With heavy care, they opened the steel hatch. A narrow shaft revealed itself, a ladder descending into cold shadow. The first team went down with lights and breathing equipment. Then came the call. "All systems stable, air safe." The general turned to Dan. "Would you like to accompany us? I believe you may find what's inside personally significant." Dan descended into the past, one rung at a time. At the bottom, the corridor opened into a concrete room about 30 feet across, walls lined with analog communications gear, manual filing systems, a generator humming faintly from some unseen source. Everything smelled of metal and dust, of years left untouched. Dr. Ellison opened a metal cabinet using a military passcode. Inside were folders marked Top Secret, all dating back to the early 60s. But it wasn't the documents that stopped Dan in his tracks. It was a photograph. The general handed it to him wordlessly. 7 men in Army uniforms stood in front of a palm-lined structure. One of them, second from the right, was unmistakable even in his youth. "That's my father," Dan said, barely above a whisper. But he never talked about any of this. He was a farmer. Quiet, reserved. He couldn't, the general said. "Your father was Staff Sergeant Robert McCrae, Signals Division, Pacific Command, 1944. Part of a covert intelligence unit responsible for communications interception. After the war, he was placed here, not randomly. His file suggested he was trustworthy, discreet, capable." Dan felt the world shift beneath him, as though the weight of history had finally announced itself. "He was never told outright," Dr. Ellison added. "These programs were layered, but we've confirmed. The land purchase, the veterans' financing, even the crop allocations over the years, all of it was monitored. Your father was part of a network. He just didn't know the full extent." They moved deeper into the bunker, into a side room filled with preserved personal effects. One container bore the label McCrae, R.J. Inside was a leather journal, photographs, letters, artifacts of a man who had lived 2 lives. Dan turned the pages slowly, finding vague notations about oversight assignments and radio contact points. Ordinary language, but loaded now with meaning. Captain Dunn approached with a separate file, her voice lowered. "Sir, we believe the federal government may owe your family compensation. The land this bunker sits on, it was never legally transferred. It's technically still under military jurisdiction." Dan stared at her. "You're telling me we never owned it?" "In appearance, yes. But legally, no. Which means a case can be made, a strong one." Later, back above ground, the general requested a quiet word. The air was warmer now, the sky a brilliant 2-blue canvas above them. "We're arranging for retroactive compensation," he said. 50-plus years of unacknowledged service, including facilities fees, land value, interest. It'll more than clear your debts." Dan's mouth went dry. "How much are we talking?" "Just over $1.25 million. The number was so surreal, he almost laughed. The farm, the debts, the sleepless nights, all about to disappear. All because of land his father had been quietly guarding for decades without ever knowing it. Or maybe, deep down, he did. As the sun lowered over the north field, Dan stood at the edge. The hatch now sealed with new locks, secure but no longer secret. At least not to him. Isabel came to stand beside him, wrapping an arm around his waist. "Do you think he knew?" she asked. Dan looked across the land, the trees beyond, the sky above. He must have suspected something. He always treated this land like it mattered more than just crops. A pause. "It did," he said finally. "It still does." The morning after the discovery, Dan awoke before the sun. Sleep had come in fits, each time slipping away with the quiet hum of memories he hadn't realized he carried. He sat at the kitchen table long before the coffee was done brewing, hands resting on a file folder now filled with documents that made his entire life feel like a footnote to something far larger. The foreclosure notice still sat there too, now dwarfed by an official letter from the Department of Defense promising a financial settlement that was hard to fathom. Isabel joined him, hair pulled back in a quick braid, her face still holding that half-awake look of someone whose dreams had been crowded with too many real thoughts. "The bank called," she said softly, sliding a cup of coffee his way. "They got the wire notification." The guy sounded stunned. Dan nodded, staring at the steam rising from the mug. "Guess they're not used to miracles that come with military escorts." She gave a small laugh, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "The veterans are coming back this morning to finish the harvest. Should we tell them?" "No," he said quickly, then paused. "Not the details, not about the bunker, or Dad, just that the government settled something tied to the north lot, and that we're clear now." The sound of tires crunching gravel pulled their attention to the front porch. But instead of the familiar vans the veterans usually arrived in, it was another small convoy of unmarked government vehicles. Out stepped Captain Dunn, now in civilian clothes but unmistakably military in bearing, carrying a thick envelope and a solemn expression. "The general asked me to come by before the veterans arrive," she said, as Dan stepped onto the porch. "Washington has authorized partial declassification, enough to recognize your father's service publicly. We're still keeping the facility itself classified, but your father's unit, the Pacific Signals Group, has been cleared for historical recognition." She handed him the envelope. Inside was a formal letter of commendation bearing the Defense Department's seal, acknowledging Staff Sergeant Robert J. McCrae's role in Pacific intelligence operations and his decades of continued classified service afterward. Below it, nestled in velvet, lay a silver star, posthumously awarded and engraved with his father's name. "This was submitted in 1945, Dunn explained quietly, but the nature of his assignments prevented the award from being processed at the time. General Albright expedited it as soon as the clearance came through." Dan's fingers traced the edges of the metal. He couldn't remember his father ever talking about war. Not the details, not even the places. Just long silences, the sound of the old radio humming in the barn at odd hours, and a quiet reverence for the flag they raised every spring. Before Dan could gather his words, the growl of van engines signaled the arrival of the veterans. Dunn gave him a subtle nod and slipped away, letting him greet them alone. As the group spilled out into the yard, there was a different energy than previous days. Rumors had clearly started to circulate, maybe about the helicopters, maybe about the suits, maybe just the air of something unusual blooming on the property. Peter Halverson approached first, gaze flicking to the metal still in Dan's hand. "Big day yesterday, huh?" he said, voice light but not casual. "Word is something serious happened." Dan held his stare. Let's just say my father's military service turned out to be more than we knew, and the government finally acknowledged it. That's why the bank's off our back." Peter's eyes softened. "Your dad was military too?" "Pacific Theater, communications. Apparently, there was more to it than he could ever talk about." Peter gave a slow nod. "Most of us carried something like that. Different wars, same silence." By midday, the harvest was in full swing again. Veterans moved through the rows with practiced rhythm, laughter rising in pockets, tools clinking like notes in an old song. Dan worked beside them, sweat on his brow and gratitude stitched into every motion. These people, most of them strangers just days ago, had become something else entirely. Not employees, not guests, but a part of something that felt ancient and brand new at the same time. Elise arrived in the afternoon with more volunteers and an update from the outreach center. "The general's office got in touch," she told Dan quietly as they stood by the loading truck. "They're securing long-term funding for the center. Apparently, they're calling it the McCrae Initiative." Dan blinked. "Wait, what?" "Apparently, your dad was involved in setting up support systems like ours decades ago. The general said something about legacy infrastructure." It didn't make sense at first, but then she handed him a binder, worn leather, filled with typed meeting minutes and grainy photos. The center's founding documents from 1976. His father's name appeared again and again, listed as community liaison, equipment consultant, private donor. Dan stared at the old black and white images, his father a younger man, standing in the background of every shot like a ghost no one had noticed. He wasn't smiling in any of them, just watching, steady, the same way he used to monitor the weather like it was something sacred. "He helped build it," Dan said quietly, and never said a word. "Different generation," Elise replied. "They didn't need the spotlight. They just did what needed doing." That evening, the veterans gathered beneath the old oak tree for sandwiches and coffee. Someone had brought a small speaker, and music played, low and nostalgic, a mix of country and soft rock, fading into the breeze. Dan sat beside Peter, the medal still in his pocket, the binder resting on his lap. "Some of the guys were talking," Peter said, scratching at his beard. "We were wondering, when the general holds the ceremony for your dad, could we come?" Dan was quiet for a moment. "You want to be there?" Peter nodded. "Different branches, different battles, but service is service, feels right." "Yeah," Dan said, voice thick. "I think he'd like that." Later, as twilight soaked the sky in indigo and gold, Captain Dunn returned once more, this time holding a printed document and a soft smile. "The ceremony's set for Saturday," she said. "At the Outreach Center. General Albright will present the medal personally. And one more thing, there were others." Dan frowned. "Others?" "Other properties, other families. Your father wasn't alone. Several farms in this county were purchased by former intelligence personnel. It was a network." He let that sink in. "The Veterans Center," he murmured. "That land too?" Dunn nodded. "Strategic placement, designed for integration. It all fed into the same system." The revelation shifted something fundamental. The quiet towns, the anonymous neighbors, the sense of invisible camaraderie he'd felt growing up. It wasn't just small-town warmth. It had been something coordinated, something sacred, something hidden in plain sight. By the time Saturday arrived, the parking lot at the Outreach Center was packed. Cars overflowed onto nearby streets. Local officials mingled with veterans, and military personnel stood crisply at attention. Inside, the main hall had been transformed. Flags hung in precise order. Historical photographs lined the walls. Images of the Pacific Signals Group, faces once obscured by silence now given room to breathe in the light. Dan wore the only suit he owned, a relic from his father's funeral, now pressed and pinned with a small service ribbon someone had given him. Isabel held the medal's presentation case, her hands shaking slightly as they sat in the front row. General Albright stepped to the podium, his bearing both solemn and warm. "Today," he began, "we honor a man whose contributions remained unspoken for most of his life. Staff Sergeant Robert James McCrae served his country in a role that demanded not only intelligence and skill, but silence. Decades of silence. Today, that silence ends." The medal was presented with full honors. A formal citation was read, acknowledging intelligence operations that had altered the course of history, while remaining invisible even to those closest to them. Dan accepted it in his father's name, the applause wrapping around him like a warm wind. Veterans from every era stood together, saluting not just the man, but the legacy of quiet service he represented. Afterward, in the reception room filled with photos, old radios, decrypted messages, and copies of now declassified files, Dan found himself surrounded by neighbors, many older, many with watery eyes and knowing nods. "Your dad helped install my first antenna," said one. "He told me how to get better reception on Channel 4 during a thunderstorm," said another. "Now I think I know why." It was like the veil had lifted. The quiet farmer who'd rarely spoken about the past was now being remembered as something more. A hidden builder, a quiet guardian, a signalman in a war of whispers. As they drove back to the farm, Isabel looked at her father, her voice hushed with wonder. "It's all connected, isn't it? The veterans, the outreach center, the land." Dan nodded slowly. He saw it, long before I did. That night, beneath a sky clear and crisp with stars, the veterans who had helped harvest the field stood in the front yard, gathered around the newly raised flagpole near the porch. They had installed it while Dan was away, a quiet tribute of their own. Peter unfolded a flag, not just any flag, but one flown over a forward base in Helmand Province. Its fabric was worn, its stripes faded, its presence deeply felt. "Thought it belonged here," he said, "where someone's been keeping watch all this time." Dan helped raise it himself. As it reached the top, several of the older veterans saluted with muscle memory shaped in boot camps and battlefields. No words were said, none needed. The flag caught the breeze, stretching outward like a held breath finally released. Dan stood there for a long while, the medal in one hand, the wind against his face. It wasn't just land anymore. It wasn't just debt or soil or weather. It was legacy. It was service. And it was far from over. The seasons passed as they always did on the McCrae farm. Spring pushing through frost. Summer arriving like a slow exhale. Autumn tumbling in with gold and wind and the scent of turned earth. But nothing felt quite the same anymore. The land hadn't changed. Not exactly. The fields still rose and fell in gentle rhythm. The barns still groaned with age, and the same creek wound its way past the edge of the north section. But there was something different in the way people moved here now. It wasn't just a farm anymore. It was something larger, something living, breathing, and quietly extraordinary. 5 years had passed since the day the military helicopter dropped from the sky and touched down in the North Field. In that time, the farm had transformed. What had begun as a last-ditch effort to give away unwanted vegetables had grown into a fully realized Veterans Agricultural Training Center, one of several across the country, though the others all looked to this one, the McCrae site, as their blueprint. What had once nearly been lost to foreclosure was now a national model, a place where purpose and healing shared space with tillers, greenhouses, and long, honest days in the sun. Dan still walked the land every morning, though now in more of an advisory role. At 64, his joints ached a little louder than they used to, and he let Isabel and the younger veterans take on the heavier work. She'd found her calling here, split between her nursing background and her natural skill as a teacher. The horticulture program she ran was now one of the most respected in the region, and every time Dan passed the greenhouse she'd designed, he felt the flicker of something close to awe. The fields that had once been filled with silence and ghosts were now full of voices. Veterans in different stages of their journey, laughing, learning, sometimes just walking quietly among the rows. Some were missing limbs. Some bore scars invisible to the eye. Some came angry, brittle, barely speaking at all. But somehow, the land softened them. The routine of tending to life, planting, weeding, harvesting, gave them space to grow things inside themselves, too. Purpose, perhaps. Or just the slow return of a belief that tomorrow was something worth planning for. Dave Halverson, once a drifting man who hadn't had a stable bed in years, was now director of operations. His voice had become the steady compass of the farm, barking orders one moment, kneeling beside a new veteran the next, showing them how to graft apple branches or rotate soil. There were nights when Dan would watch him walk through the rows like a man who'd always belonged here, and he'd feel a quiet gratitude that he never could quite put into words. One bright autumn morning, the air still holding the memory of last night's chill, a helicopter returned. Not with the same dramatic tension as 5 years ago, but this time with reporters, foreign officials, and representatives from allied countries looking to understand how a simple piece of farmland had become a place of national healing. General Albright stepped out first, now retired but still carrying the posture of someone used to command. He had become something like family to the McCraes, visiting often, always with a quiet reverence when he passed the edge of the north field where the bunker entrance still lay hidden beneath carefully maintained earth and stone. They toured the property together, the general and the visitors, showing off the new modular classrooms, the livestock program, the therapy gardens designed for veterans with PTSD, even the solar array that now powered much of the site. Every detail was a testament to what had grown here from a single act of generosity, the kind that had no goal except to help. That evening, after the delegation had left, Dan stood at the flagpole, the same one the veterans had erected years earlier. The current flag had flown over a peacekeeping base in Mali, brought by a Canadian veteran who now ran the culinary program on the farm. Each flag had a story, and every time it changed, the veterans gathered, saluted, and shared a meal. It had become ritual, not out of obligation, but out of something deeper, something like faith in what they'd built together. Inside the original farmhouse, a small museum had taken shape in what used to be the den. Photographs, documents, radios, even pieces of uniform. A timeline showed the classified work of the Pacific Signals Group, carefully curated with only the details that had been cleared for public release. The Silver Star awarded to Robert McCrae hung in a case above a small plaque, which read simply, "Service beyond recognition, honor without applause." It wasn't flashy. Nothing here ever was. But it told the story in quiet detail, of a man who had served his country without needing to be seen, and of the son who had unknowingly inherited that same instinct for quiet action. Dan would sometimes sit in that room alone, reading through his father's journal, now laminated and preserved in a glass display. He'd flip through the pages filled with cryptic notations, diagrams, coordinates, and marvel at how his father had managed to keep so much hidden under the guise of just being a farmer. One day, Isabel handed him a letter. It had arrived from the Department of Veterans Affairs. It was official now. The McCrae Veterans Agricultural Program was being designated as the National Center of Excellence, a title that came with continued funding, expansion support, and the responsibility of training new program leaders for sites across the country. They would be teaching others now, veterans, farmers, and communities alike, how to blend agriculture and healing, just as Dan had done without meaning to. He stood by the kitchen window watching a group of new arrivals step out of a van. Most were young. One walked with a cane. Another wore dark glasses. A third kept his hands in his pockets and didn't speak to anyone. They were nervous, just like every group before them. Unsure if this place could really do what others had said. Unsure if they could ever feel whole again. Dave walked over to greet them, voice calm, cracking a joke. Isabel followed, clipboard in hand, offering a smile and a sandwich. It was the same every time. A pattern, a rhythm, like planting seeds. You don't see what they'll become right away, but if you care for them, give them time and sun and water, they grow. Dan watched until they disappeared behind the barn, swallowed by the fields. He sipped his coffee, now lukewarm, and turned his gaze toward the north section, where the rocks still hid the entrance to a bunker that had once protected the entire country from a war that never came. What had been hidden for so long was now honored, not shouted from rooftops, but carried forward with intention, folded into every lesson taught in the classrooms, every row planted by calloused hands. As the sun dipped behind the western hills, Dan returned to the porch, his chair creaking the same way it always had. He sat with the silver star in his hand, the same one they'd pinned on his father's name. He didn't need the applause. He didn't need the spotlight. It had never been about recognition. It had always been about purpose, the kind that endures quietly, long after names are forgotten, long after medals tarnish. A breeze picked up, tugging at the flag on the pole. The sound of it, the soft, steady flap of fabric against sky, felt like a heartbeat, a reminder, a promise. Dan looked out across the fields that had once seemed like the end of his story but had instead become its beginning. Where once he'd seen only drought and debt and failure, he now saw greenhouses, laughter, healing, and memory. What had been nearly lost was now growing more than he ever could have imagined. And he knew, without question, that his father would have approved.